Welcome back. Good to see you. Let's take a look in the second part of Genesis 41 this time. I've been digging along here in Genesis, and I'm having a great time. Thanks for joining me and enjoying the fun with me. So we'll start at verse 37 and pick up the story in Genesis 41. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked him, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. The men shouted before him, "Make way!" Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh. He said, "It is because God made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was a famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all the world. Well, okay, there's the story. Famines are not unusual. This one is different in that it affects a large area. It affects, apparently, the then-known world. And Egypt has produced bountifully to feed the whole world for the 7 years of famine. What a story. So, as we get into this, we'd have to admit it's a lovely story of what seems to be the reversal of injustice. Joseph had suffered a long time unjustly, but then he had been elevated to a position of importance and stature and favor. Now, we could say that it's a story that is a form of reparation or perhaps divine reward, but it's going to be an illustration in several ways, and so we want to dig into it and see how how it affects, we'll see the revelation that's in it. So this seems to be a portrait of Adam in Eden before he sinned. So the first Adam, Jesus is going to be the second Adam. So in between, here is this thing that looks back and looks forward, and we have this poster, so to speak, this glimpse of past and future. So it reflects the blessing of God on his creature who was filled with his Spirit. In the creation count, back in Genesis 1, man was dependent on God for his knowledge of good and of evil. Then he decided to try a shortcut to get it somewhere else. Here in this story in Genesis 41, Joseph is dependent on God for knowledge of good and evil. Now in Egypt, Joseph is made Pharaoh's vice regent over all the land of Egypt. In Genesis 1, Adam is made God's vice regent over all the earth. Also, in Genesis 41, we see that Pharaoh gave Joseph his signet ring, and with it came all the authority that Pharaoh had. Now, I want to just show you that the psalmist grabs this idea, puts it in words, and then it's quoted in the New Testament. The psalmist in chapter 8 says, "What is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man that you care for him? You have made him a little lower than the angels and crowned him with glory and honor. You made him ruler over the works of your hands and put everything under his feet." The reference there should be 4 through 6. I dropped off the last few verses and included the fourth one. But I want you to notice the phrase, the Son of Man. Now, Jesus called himself the Son of Man. There was no miracle that he was divine, that he was God. The awesome miracle of the incarnation, that he became fully man, is what is heralded throughout the Christ event. The Gospels particularly focus that Jesus is the Son of Man. And so what we're seeing here is a reference to the Messiah, the Son of Man, and quoted in Hebrews as a reference to Jesus as Messiah. So keep this in mind now. In Genesis, we have this picture. There's a comparison that continues between Adam and Joseph now. And so Pharaoh gave Joseph his signet ring, that is the authority. But it also says that he dressed him in royal garments. Excuse me. God made Adam in his own image and gave him authority to rule over all the land. Pharaoh gave Joseph a wife, said to be the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. On is Heliopolis. It's a big city that today is on the outskirts of Cairo. And in the same way, back in Eden, God gave Adam a wife. Her name was Eve. So the picture of Joseph in Egypt is a look at what might have been had Adam trusted God for wisdom and for blessing. Now, I want to just take a little overview of the names, and I'm sure that if we could all understand enough Hebrew, there would be some revelation in the names. But Pharaoh gives Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah, which means he who deciphered the hidden. Joseph's given name was He Shall Add, with a reference to God doing that. Asenath, the wife given to Joseph, means she belongs to her father. And that's going to be important for us in just a little bit here. So she becomes the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph. Joseph's named the firstborn Manasseh, which means to forget. And he says, because God made me forget my troubles, but also to forget my family. That's an interesting little note there. The secondborn was called Ephraim, which means fruitful, fertile, or productive. Potipharah was the priest of On. Like I said, that's the ancient city of Heliopolis. There's not much left of it, just some ruins. They've scavenged the material to build the rest of stuff in Cairo. But there is a monolith like the Washington Monument, which is thought to be the oldest in the world. That's kind of interesting. Someday I'd like to see that. But this priest led the people in the worship of Ra, which was the sun god. Potipharah, it means he whom Ra gives. So those names are Egyptian names, and they have significance I'm sure they have revelation in this story. I just don't have a grasp of it at this point. There's a forward look, however, in this section of Genesis, the second part of chapter 41, that looks forward. It also has a backward glance back to the Garden of Eden, but it is looking forward to the coming of the promised one, the Messiah. So in this picture, the author gives a peek at what is yet to come. And it anticipates the coming of the one. And I use a capital there because we're talking about one individual who is to be the promised one. The word is Messiah. In Greek it is Christ, to whom the kingdom belongs. There's been a tension between the family of Joseph and the offspring of Judah, and of course, we know the rest of the story, but if you didn't know the rest of the story, you'd wonder which one was to carry, whose lineage was to produce the Messiah. Would it be Joseph? And as he is pictured here, it seems that we would be leaning in that direction. Now, Judah was the fourthborn, not the firstborn, but you see, each of his older brothers had disqualified themselves by sin, and so Judah also did wrong, but he repented of it. He confessed it and repented. And that seems to make all the difference in biblical perspective. So the life of Joseph becomes only a picture of the one who is to reign that will actually come from the house of Judah. So we ask ourselves now, why? Why would God pick the lineage of Joseph rather than the lineage of Judah rather than the lineage of Joseph? Well, Joseph's progeny derives from an Egyptian wife. She's a Gentile, but she's a pagan. And there's no mention of her ever converting to a belief in Yahweh or the God of the Bible. Judah's progeny, however, he had a Gentile wife also, but the two sons by her had died. And so he fathered a son by Tamar, his sister and his daughter-in-law, who was an Israelite. And so it is through that son that the lineage to the Messiah is going to come. Now, there is included in Messianic lineage Gentile women. You think of Rahab and Ruth. But you see, each of those had converted. Each of those have a conversion experience and a faith testimony. And so each in their own way commits to be a believer in the real God. We don't have that from Joseph's wife. So the essence of this little thing is going to just simply say it matters who you marry. And it matters whether they're believers or not. Now, in the end of the Old Testament, in the book of Malachi, God says that he wants his people to raise up godly seed. Now, of course, they're commanded to fill the earth, but God wants parents to raise godly seed. Apparently, that's difficult if one of the parents is not a believer. And so you have this little insight here in Scripture. I think all of this is fascinating. Well, thanks for joining me today again, and we'll do it again next week. And in a few weeks, I'll have to go to Mozambique, and so I'll be absent for a while, but we'll catch up. Anyway, there are about 16 more, 16, 17, 18 more shots that I'm going to take at Genesis, and then we will have finished this book. What a great book. Thanks for being on this journey with me. May God bless you.